I once wrote my phone number on an airport security pass and handed it to a police officer with a question I could barely breathe through. Will you call me? I thought grief had made me reckless. Turns out, it had finally made me brave. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the one with power, it's the one who sees past it. Hi, I'm Michael, and this is True Turns, true stories you'll never forget. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. My name is Amber Hayes. I'm 29 years old. I live in a penthouse overlooking the city, and I'm the CEO of a global luxury brand worth more money than I'll ever need. My late husband built the empire. I just inherited the loneliness that came with it. Work has been suffocating lately, back-to-back investor meetings, charity galas, where people smile at my checkbook instead of my face, and assistants who manage my calendar like I'm an asset, not a person. Most days I move through marble hallways and glass conference rooms, surrounded by people but completely alone. Since Michael's death 2 years ago, the penthouse has been silent. Not peaceful silent. Asterisk, empty, times silent. That afternoon, I made a last-minute decision to leave town. No destination, no plan, just a need to escape the weight of being Mrs. Michael Hayes, billionaire widow. I didn't tell anyone. I just grabbed my bag and headed to the private airport terminal. The car ride there was a blur of gray sky and blurred city lights. My driver, Marcus, knew better than to make conversation when I was like this, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, staring out the window like the answers to my life were hiding somewhere in the traffic. He'd been with me since before Michael died. He knew the signs. When we pulled up to the private terminal, I didn't wait for him to open the door. I just grabbed my carry-on and walked toward the entrance, heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome counting down to nothing. Inside, the terminal was pristine. Polished floors, ambient lighting, the faint hum of wealth insulating itself from the chaos of commercial travel. A receptionist smiled at me, the kind of smile that's been practiced in a mirror. Mrs. Hayes, we weren't expecting you today. Shall I notify? No, I said, cutting her off gently. I just need to get through security. Her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. Of course, right this way. I followed her through the quiet corridor toward the checkpoint. This was supposed to be easy, quick, anonymous. Just another transaction in a life full of them. But then I saw him. He stood at the security station in his dark uniform, badge catching the overhead lights, posture relaxed but attentive. Officer Edward Wallace, though I wouldn't learn his name until later. He wasn't tall in an imposing way, but there was something steady about him, grounded, like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I hung back for a moment, watching. An elderly man approached the checkpoint, struggling with an oversized suitcase. The officer stepped forward without hesitation, lifting it onto the conveyor belt with ease. "Let me get that for you, sir," he said, his voice warm. "Take your time going through, no rush." The old man smiled, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, son. These old bones aren't what they used to be." "You're doing just fine," the officer replied, patting his shoulder gently before moving back to his post. A moment later, a young mother with a toddler on her hip fumbled with her boarding pass, diaper bag slipping off her shoulder. The child started to cry loud, piercing wails that echoed through the quiet terminal. I watched the mother's face crumble, embarrassment and exhaustion written in every line. The officer didn't flinch. He walked over, crouched down to the child's level, and pulled a small toy badge from his pocket. "Hey there, little officer," he said softly. "You think you can help me keep everyone safe today?" The toddler hiccuped, eyes wide, then reached for the badge with chubby fingers. The crying stopped. The mother exhaled, tears pooling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Nothing to apologize for," he said, standing. "You're doing great. Take your time." There it was again. Asterisk. Take your time. Asterisk. Like time was something people were allowed to have. Like rushing wasn't mandatory. Like being human was enough. I felt something crack open inside my chest. A hairline fracture in the armor I'd been wearing for 2 years. When it was my turn, I walked forward, shoulders back, chin up, the mask I'd perfected, professional, untouchable. I handed him my boarding pass without looking directly at him, already anticipating the shift, the moment he'd see my name, the way his tone would change, the sudden deference, the careful distance people put between themselves and money. He took the pass, glanced at it briefly, then looked up at me. Not at my designer coat, not at the diamond studs in my ears, not at the surname that opened doors and closed hearts. He looked at times me asterisk. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and kind, "take your time." I blinked, opened my mouth to say something polite and forgettable, but nothing came out. He didn't seem to notice my silence. He just scanned the pass, checked something on his screen, and handed it back with a small nod. "You're all set. Safe travels." His hand brushed mine as I took the pass. It lasted less than a second, but I felt it everywhere. I should have walked away, nodded, smiled, moved through security like I'd done 1,000 times before. Instead, I stood there, frozen, staring at the pass in my hand. And then I did something I still can't fully explain. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I forgot to ask you something." He turned back, eyebrows raised slightly. "Yes, ma'am?" I reached into my purse, fingers trembling as I found my pen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I flipped the boarding pass over, the blank side facing up, and wrote quickly before I could change my mind. My phone number, clear, undeniable. And beneath it, in handwriting that looked more vulnerable than I'd ever allowed myself to be. Asterisk, "Will you call me?" Asterisk. I folded the pass, walked back to him, and placed it in his hand. "I think I gave you the wrong one," I said, the lie transparent and fragile between us. He looked down at the pass, then at me. His expression shifted confusion, surprise, something softer I couldn't name. "Ma'am, You don't have to," I said quickly, already stepping back, my face burning. I wanted to. That's all." Before he could respond, I turned and walked through the security scanner, pulse hammering, legs unsteady, refusing to look back. I grabbed my bag from the conveyor belt and kept moving, one foot in front of the other, until I reached the empty gate area. Only then did I allow myself to collapse into a chair, hands shaking, breath coming in short bursts. Asterisk. What did I just do? Asterisk. I covered my face with my hands, equal parts mortified and exhilarated. I just handed my phone number to a complete stranger, a police officer, a man who probably thought I was insane or bored or playing some kind of cruel game. But God, the way he'd looked at that elderly man, the way he'd comforted that crying child, the way he'd said, "Times take your time," times like it was a gift he was giving freely. I hadn't felt seen in so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a hotel room in a city I couldn't remember choosing, staring at my phone like it held the answer to every question I'd ever been too afraid to ask. He hadn't called. Of course he hadn't called. Why would he? I was a stranger who'd ambushed him at work with a question that probably seemed desperate or manipulative or both. He'd probably thrown the pass away the moment I left. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The quiet kindness in his face, the way his hand had brushed mine, the way he'd looked at me, really looked without wanting anything in return. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel empty. I felt terrified and alive. And I had no idea what came next. Edward stood at the security checkpoint long after his shift should have ended, the boarding pass folded in his pocket like a secret he wasn't sure he was allowed to keep. He'd read it a dozen times already, the phone number written in elegant, hurried script. The question beneath it that felt more like a confession. "Will you call me?" He should throw it away. That's what made sense. Women like her, wealthy, beautiful, untouchable, didn't hand their numbers to men like him. Airport security officers who drove 10-year-old trucks and lived in modest apartments on the edge of town. This had to be a mistake, a joke. Maybe she'd been dared by friends, or maybe she was just bored and looking for entertainment. But then he remembered the way her hand had trembled when she handed it to him, the way her voice had cracked slightly when she said, "You don't have to." The way she'd walked away without looking back, like she was terrified of what she'd just done. That didn't feel like a prank. His supervisor's voice cut through his thoughts. "Wallace, you're off the clock. Go home." Edward nodded, stuffed the pass deeper into his pocket, and headed to the parking lot. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that used to be filled with someone else's voice, someone else's laughter, someone else's presence. But that was 3 years ago. Before Rebecca left. Before she told him he was too kind for his own good and that kindness didn't pay the bills or fund the life she wanted. I need more, Edward. More than this. More than you. She'd found more. A real estate developer with a summer home and a sports car. Last he heard, they were engaged. Edward had thrown himself into work after that. Extra shifts. Volunteering at the community center on weekends. Helping strangers because he couldn't help the one person who'd mattered most. It was easier than sitting alone in his apartment, staring at the empty side of the bed. He pulled into his parking spot and sat in the truck for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. He pulled the boarding pass out again, unfolding it carefully. Will you call me? What would he even say? Hi, you probably don't remember me, but I'm the guy who checked your boarding pass and froze like an idiot when you gave me your number. He rubbed his face, exhaled slowly, and tucked the pass into his wallet. He'd think about it tomorrow. Maybe. 3 days passed. Amber sat in her hotel room, then later in her penthouse, phone always within arm's reach. She checked it obsessively between meetings, during calls, in the middle of the night when sleep wouldn't come. Every notification made her heart jump. Every time it wasn't him, something inside her sank a little deeper. She felt ridiculous. She was a CEO. She'd negotiated million-dollar deals with boardrooms full of men who'd tried to intimidate her. She'd rebuilt a company from the ground up after Michael died. And here she was, checking her phone like a teenager waiting for a text back. Maybe he thought she was crazy. Maybe he'd shown the past to his coworkers and they'd all laughed. Maybe he was married. Maybe he just wasn't interested. The logical part of her brain said to move on. Forget it. It was a moment of weakness, nothing more. But the other part, the part that had felt something crack open in that airport, couldn't let go. On the 4th day, Amber had to return home. Same private terminal, same polished floors, same receptionist with the practiced smile. Her heart hammered as she approached security. She told herself she wasn't hoping to see him. She told herself it didn't matter. But when she rounded the corner and saw him standing at the checkpoint, her breath caught. He looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Edward straightened slightly, cleared his throat, and gestured her forward. Ma'am, he said, his voice carefully professional. Boarding pass, please. Amber's hands were steadier this time as she handed it to him. Their fingers didn't touch. He scanned it, checked his screen, and handed it back. You're all set. She took the pass, hesitated, then said quietly, I wasn't sure I'd see you again. I work most days, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I meant, she trailed off, heat rising in her cheeks. Never mind. She started to walk away, but his voice stopped her. I kept it. She turned back. What? The pass. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, opened it, and showed her. The boarding pass, folded carefully, tucked behind his ID. I kept it. Something in her chest loosened. But you didn't call. I didn't think. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I didn't think someone like you would want to hear from someone like me. Someone like me? She repeated softly. You know what I mean. He glanced around, aware they weren't alone. His voice dropped. I looked you up. Amber Hayes, CEO, billionaire widow. You're in a different world. Maybe I'm tired of that world, she said. They stood there, the security checkpoint between them, neither knowing what to say next. Finally, Amber pulled out her phone. Coffee? She said. That's all I'm asking for. 1 cup of coffee. If you hate it, if it's awkward, if you decide I'm crazy, you never have to see me again. Edward looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Okay. Okay? Coffee sounds good. Amber felt a smile break across her face, the first real smile she'd worn in months. She typed her number into his phone, handed it back, and said, Text me when you're free. I will, he said. This time when she walked away, she looked back. He was watching her, the phone still in his hand, something like wonder on his face. That night, Amber's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Coffee sounds good. How's Saturday? She read the message 3 times, heart racing, before typing back. Amber. Saturday's perfect. She set the phone down, pressed her hands to her face, and laughed a sound that felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. For the first time in 3 years, Edward fell asleep without thinking about what he'd lost. For the first time in 2 years, Amber fell asleep thinking about what she might find. Both of them felt something they'd thought was gone forever. Hope. The coffee date never happened. Not because either of them changed their minds, but because Amber's assistant intercepted her calendar and suggested something more appropriate for a woman of her standing. Before Amber could protest, reservations had been made at Marcello's, one of those restaurants where the wine list costs more than most people's monthly rent, and the wait list stretches 6 months unless your last name opens doors. Amber had tried to cancel. She'd actually picked up her phone 3 times to text Edward and suggest somewhere quieter, somewhere normal. But each time, doubt crept in. What if he thought she was embarrassed to be seen with him? What if changing plans made it seem like she didn't take this seriously? So she kept the reservation and told herself it would be fine. It was just dinner. They'd have a quiet table in the back. Nobody would notice. Nobody would care. She was wrong on both counts. Edward stood outside Marcello's on Saturday evening, tugging at the collar of his shirt for the 3rd time. It was his best shirt, a simple navy button-down he'd bought 2 years ago for his nephew's wedding. He'd paired it with dark jeans and the one pair of dress shoes he owned that weren't scuffed beyond repair. He felt ridiculous. The restaurant was all glass and mood lighting, situated on the corner of the city's most expensive street. Through the windows he could see crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and people dressed like they were attending the opera. A valet in a crisp uniform stood by the entrance, eyeing Edward with barely concealed skepticism. Edward checked his phone again. Amber's last text had said 7 p.m. It was 6:58. He could still leave. Text her some excuse. Pretend he'd gotten called into work. She'd understand, wouldn't she? Or maybe she'd be relieved. Maybe this whole thing was a mistake and she was inside right now, regretting everything. But then the door opened, and there she was. Amber wore a black dress that probably cost more than his truck, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. But it was her smile that stopped him, nervous, genuine, a little unsure. The same smile she'd worn at the airport when she'd handed him her number. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he managed, suddenly forgetting every coherent thought he'd rehearsed on the drive over. She glanced at the restaurant behind her, then back at him, and for just a moment he saw something like regret flash across her face. "I should have asked if you liked Italian food." "I like food in general," he said, trying for humor. "Not picky." She laughed a small, grateful sound. "Come on, our table's ready." The moment they walked inside, Edward felt it. The shift in the air. The way conversations paused mid-sentence. The way heads turned, not obviously, but just enough. A hostess materialized, all gleaming teeth and professional warmth. "Mrs. Hayes, so wonderful to see you again. Right this way." They were led through the restaurant, past tables of people Edward would never normally be in the same room with. Designer suits, jewelry that caught the light, watches that probably cost more than his annual salary, and all of them watching. The hostess seated them at a table near the center of the room, not tucked away in a corner like Edward had hoped, but positioned where everyone could see, where everyone would see. Edward pulled out Amber's chair before the hostess could. It was automatic, something his mother had drilled into him since he was 12. "Be a gentleman, Edward. Always." Amber smiled at him as she sat. "Thank you." But Edward noticed the flash, just a glint of light from across the room. Someone with a phone, camera aimed their direction. His stomach tightened. The waiter appeared with menus that had no prices listed. Edward opened his and immediately regretted it. Half the items were in Italian. The other half were descriptions so elaborate he couldn't tell what the actual food was. "The agnolotti is excellent," Amber said gently, sensing his hesitation. "Or the branzino, if you prefer fish." Edward scanned the menu again, landed on something that sounded vaguely familiar. "I'll have the pasta. The first one." The waiter's smile was professionally polite, but Edward caught the flicker of something else. Amusement, maybe? Or pity? "Excellent choice, sir. And for the lady?" Amber ordered without looking at the menu, her voice steady and familiar with the routine. Wine was suggested. She declined. Water was poured into glasses that looked too delicate to actually use. And through it all, Edward felt the weight of eyes on them. The whispers started before their food arrived. Edward didn't hear them directly, The conversations were too quiet, too carefully modulated for that, but he saw the glances. The way a woman at the next table leaned toward her companion and murmured something behind her hand. The way a man in an expensive suit looked Edward up and down, his expression somewhere between confusion and disdain. Amber noticed too. Her smile tightened at the edges, her posture going rigid in that way he'd seen at the airport, the armor sliding back into place. Is he her driver? The voice carried just far enough. Edward's hand froze halfway to his water glass. Can't be. Why would she bring her driver inside? Maybe he's new security. Look at his shirt. Security doesn't dress like that. Amber's jaw clenched. Ignore them, she said quietly. But Edward couldn't. He felt every stare like a physical weight, every whispered speculation like a knife between his ribs. He looked down at his shirt, his best shirt, the one that had seemed perfectly fine an hour ago, and suddenly saw it through their eyes. Off the rack. Cheap. Wrong. He didn't belong here. That much was obvious to everyone in the room. Their food arrived. Edward's pasta looked beautiful and tasted like nothing because he couldn't focus past the mounting humiliation burning in his chest. Amber tried to make conversation, asking about his work, his family, anything to pull his attention away from the room around them. But then the cameras started. Not professional paparazzi with massive lenses, but guests with phones. Casual snapshots that weren't casual at all. Edward saw them out of the corner of his eye. A woman angling her phone to capture their table. A man pretending to take a selfie while clearly including them in the frame. Amber, Edward said quietly. I know. Her voice was tight. I'm sorry. I didn't think. Who is he? A voice from a nearby table, louder than the others. The widow Hayes doesn't date. Everyone knows that. Maybe he works for her company? In that shirt? Amber set down her fork with deliberate care. Edward watched her hand tremble slightly before she steadied it. We can go, she said. We don't have to stay. No. Edward forced himself to pick up his fork again. It's fine. It wasn't fine. They both knew it. By the time dessert menus were offered and politely declined, Edward felt hollowed out. Amber paid the bill. He didn't even see her pull out a card. It just appeared and disappeared with practiced efficiency, and they walked toward the exit in silence. Outside, the air was cool and blessedly quiet. The valet brought Amber's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Edward's apartment, and they stood on the sidewalk, neither quite knowing what to say. I'm sorry, Amber said finally. I should have picked somewhere else. Somewhere more. I wasn't thinking. It's fine, Edward said again, the lie wearing thinner each time. It's not fine. They were awful. The way they looked at you. The way they looked at us, he corrected quietly. Like we don't make sense together. We do make sense, Amber insisted, but there was desperation in her voice. Edward, I don't care what they think. I don't care about any of them. But they're your world. He met her eyes, saw the conflict there. That restaurant, those people, that's normal for you. And I get it. I do. But I can't. He gestured vaguely at the restaurant behind them. I can't be that person. I don't own a designer suit. I don't know which fork to use first. I drive a 10-year-old truck and eat dinner in front of the TV most nights. I don't want you to change, Amber said. Then what do you want? The question came out sharper than he intended. Because from where I'm standing, this feels like... He stopped himself, but she finished the thought. Like what? Like I'm a project, he said quietly. Like you're trying to fix something broken inside you by helping the poor guy who was nice to you at the airport. Amber's face went pale. That's not Edward. That's not what this is. Isn't it? He pulled out his phone, opened a social media app he rarely used, and showed her. The photo was already everywhere, him pulling out her chair. The caption. Mystery man spotted with billionaire widow Amber Hayes. Is she slumming it? Or is this the new help? The comments were worse. Amber stared at the screen, then at him. I'll fix this. I have a PR team. I can make this go away. I can... Fix it with money? Edward asked. Make a statement? Pay people to take down the photos? If that's what it takes, yes. She reached for his hand. He pulled away. I'm not a charity case, Amber. The words hung between them like a wall neither could see past. That's not what I meant, she said, her voice breaking. Edward, please. But he was already backing away, keys in his hand, the space between them growing wider. I think this was a mistake. Don't say that. I don't fit in your world, he said. And I don't think you fit in mine. Maybe it's better if we just… Don't, she said again, more firmly this time. Don't run away because tonight was hard. I'm not running. He paused at his truck, hand on the door. I'm being realistic. You'll realize it too, eventually. He climbed into the truck and drove away, leaving Amber standing alone under the restaurant lights, her hands still outstretched, reaching for someone who was already gone. That night, Edward sat in his apartment staring at his phone. The photo had been shared thousands of times. The comments kept coming. Most of them said the same thing in different ways. He's not good enough for her. Maybe they were right. Amber sat in her penthouse staring at the same photo, reading the same comments, her chest tight with a familiar ache. She'd tried to call him twice. Both times, it went to voicemail. She'd handled billion-dollar negotiations with ruthless precision. She'd rebuilt a company from tragedy into triumph. But she couldn't fix this. She couldn't fix the gap between their worlds. She couldn't fix the way he'd looked at her, like she'd confirmed every doubt he'd ever had about himself. The worst part was, she understood why he'd left. And she had no idea how to bring him back. Amber spent 3 days trying to fix things the only way she knew how. She had her PR team draft statements. She considered making donations to causes in Edward's name. She even thought about showing up at the airport again, but that felt manipulative, calculated. Everything he'd accused her of being. On the 4th day, she stopped trying to fix it and started trying to understand it. She thought about the way he'd looked at her outside the restaurant, like she'd confirmed something he'd always believed about himself, that he wasn't enough. That people like her only noticed people like him when they wanted to feel good about themselves. She'd spent 2 years being worshipped for her money and pitied for her loss. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as just a person. Edward had given her that at the airport, and she'd repaid him by dragging him into her world and watching it tear him apart. The realization made her sick. She needed to see him. Not in her world this time. In his. It took 2 phone calls to find out where Edward volunteered. The first was to the airport supervisor, who was reluctant to share personal information until Amber explained carefully, honestly, that she wasn't trying to cause trouble. The second was to the community center itself, where a cheerful woman named Rita told her Edward came in every Tuesday and Thursday evening to help with the meal service. He's a godsend, Rita had said. Never misses a shift, always stays late to clean up. You a friend of his? Amber paused. I'm trying to be. Thursday evening, Amber stood outside the Riverside Community Center, in jeans and a plain sweater, no designer labels, no jewelry except the simple wedding band she still hadn't been able to take off. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no armor. Just her. The building was old but well-maintained, with hand-painted signs and children's artwork taped to the windows. Through the glass doors, she could see people lined up, families with tired eyes and worn clothes waiting patiently for a hot meal. And there, behind the serving counter in a t-shirt and apron, was Edward. Amber took a breath and walked inside. Edward saw her immediately, his hands stilled over the tray of rolls he was arranging, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to something harder to read. She walked up to the counter, past the line of people, and said quietly, "Can I help?" "Amber, what are you?" "I'm not here to apologize with money," she said. "I'm not here to fix things with a press release or a donation. I'm just here, if you'll let me." Rita appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Oh, hello, you must be Amber. Edward, you gonna introduce your friend, or just stand there like a statue?" Edward blinked, then seemed to recover. "Rita, this is Amber. Amber, Rita runs this place." "Nice to meet you, honey." Rita sized her up with the kind of look that missed nothing. "You ever served food before?" "No," Amber admitted. "Well, you're about to learn. Edward, get her an apron. We're short-staffed tonight, and the dinner rush is coming." Rita disappeared back into the kitchen before either of them could protest. Edward grabbed an apron from a hook and handed it to Amber without quite meeting her eyes. "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said, tying it around her waist. "I want to." For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side in silence broken only by necessary words. "More mashed potatoes here. Can you grab another tray? Watch out, that pan's hot." Amber served meals to people who didn't recognize her name, who didn't care about her bank account, who just needed food and kindness. A mother with 3 children who thanked her with exhausted gratitude. An elderly man who told her a joke that wasn't funny but made her smile anyway. A teenager who looked at her with the same guarded expression she'd seen in her own mirror. She watched Edward with each of them, the way he remembered names, the way he asked about someone's job interview or someone else's sick grandmother, the way he gave extra portions to the kids without anyone noticing. This was who he was, not at an airport checkpoint following protocol, not at an expensive restaurant drowning in judgment. Here, giving pieces of himself to people who had nothing to give back. And she understood finally why her money had felt like an insult. When the last person had been served and the kitchen was clean, Rita sent them outside to take the trash to the dumpster. The evening air was cool, the sky fading from blue to purple, and suddenly they were alone. Edward lifted the trash bag into the dumpster, then stood there with his hands in his pockets, not looking at her. "Why did you really come?" "Because I was wrong," Amber said. "At the restaurant. After. I tried to fix the problem, the only way I know how, with money and control and power. But that's not what you needed." "What did I need?" "For me to see you." She took a step closer. "The way you saw me at the airport, not as a problem to solve or a reputation to manage, just as a person." Edward finally looked at her. "I shouldn't have walked away like that. You had every right to." "No, He rubbed the back of his neck. "I let my own stuff get in the way. My ex-wife, the things she said before she left. I heard it all again in that restaurant, and I took it out on you." Amber leaned against the wall beside him. "What did she say?" He was quiet for a long moment. "That doing everything right doesn't make someone stay. That being a good man doesn't pay the bills. That she needed more than I could give her." He exhaled slowly. "She left me for a guy with money. Lots of it. And I told myself it didn't matter. That I was better off, but it did matter." Amber finished softly. "Yeah." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the parking lot. "My husband died 2 years ago," Amber said finally. "Heart attack. He was 35. We were supposed to have decades together, and instead I got 2 years and a fortune I'd give back in a heartbeat if it meant one more day with him." Edward turned to look at her. "People think money fixes everything," she continued. "They think it cushions the fall, makes the pain easier, but it doesn't. Money can't fill an empty bed. It can't make you feel less alone when you wake up at 3 in the morning, reaching for someone who isn't there." "I'm sorry," Edward said quietly. "Me too." She met his eyes. "For your marriage. For making you feel like I was trying to save you. You don't need saving, Edward. You're the kindest person I've met in years, and I wanted to be around that. Around you. That's all." Something in his expression softened. "I wanted to be around you too. That's what scared me." "Why?" "Because I haven't felt like this since before everything fell apart, and I didn't know if I could survive it falling apart again." Amber understood that fear. She lived with it, every day. They stood there in the growing darkness, neither moving, until Edward shifted slightly and his hand brushed against hers, just his fingers against hers, barely touching. It was accidental. It should have been nothing. But Amber felt it everywhere, a spark, a current, something electric and terrifying and achingly welcome. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Their fingers intertwined slowly, carefully, like they were both afraid the other might disappear. "I'm scared," Amber whispered. "Me too," Edward said. But neither of them let go. 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo neither of them knew how to name. They weren't dating, not officially. But Edward texted her good morning most days, and Amber found herself saving funny things that happened in meetings just to tell him later. They met for coffee twice more at a quiet diner this time, nowhere near her world. They talked for hours about nothing and everything. His childhood in Colorado, her first disastrous attempt at running a board meeting, the books they'd both read, the dreams they'd both abandoned. He volunteered at the community center. She started showing up on Thursdays, no announcement, just tying on an apron and falling into rhythm beside him. Rita stopped asking questions and started setting aside 2 aprons every week. Once after a long shift, they sat in Edward's truck in the parking lot and talked until midnight. His hand had rested on the center console between them, close enough to touch but not quite touching. Amber had stared at it, wondering what would happen if she just reached over, wondering if he wanted her to, wondering if she was reading everything wrong. When she finally got out of the truck and walked to her car, she'd felt his eyes on her the whole way. They texted that night until 2 a.m., but neither of them said what they were really thinking. The problem was fear. Edward's fear that he wasn't enough. That eventually, Amber would wake up and realize she could have anyone, someone from her world, someone who fit, someone who wouldn't embarrass her at restaurants or make her explain who he was. Amber's fear that she was too much, that her money, her grief, her complicated life would crush whatever fragile thing was building between them. That loving someone again meant risking the kind of loss that had nearly destroyed her the first time. So they existed in the in-between, close but not too close, wanting but not admitting, afraid to move forward, unable to step back, until Amber couldn't stand it anymore. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she made the decision. She was in her office, pretending to review quarterly reports, but really just staring out the window at the city below. Her phone sat on the desk beside her, Edward's last text still glowing on the screen. Edward, saw a dog wearing sunglasses today. Thought you'd appreciate that. She'd laughed out loud when she'd gotten it. Then she'd spent 20 minutes crafting the perfect response. Then she deleted it and sent back a simple, amazing, 10/10 dog. This was ridiculous. She was 29 years old. She ran a multi-billion-dollar company. She'd negotiated with investors who'd tried to take advantage of her grief, fired executives who'd underestimated her, and rebuilt an empire from the ground up. And she couldn't tell one man that she was falling for him. She picked up her phone and texted her assistant, "Cancel my afternoon meetings, something came up." Then she grabbed her bag and left before she could change her mind. The private airport terminal was quiet when she arrived, just as it had been that first day weeks ago. But this time Amber had driven herself. No Marcus, no security detail. No assistants hovering with schedules and phone calls. Just her, a small overnight bag, and a boarding pass she'd printed that morning for a flight she had no intention of taking. She walked through the entrance, past the receptionist, who looked surprised to see her without an entourage, and headed straight for security. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Edward was there, checking passengers through with his usual quiet efficiency. He hadn't seen her yet. Amber watched him for a moment, the way he smiled at an elderly woman, the way he patiently explained the security process to a nervous first-time flyer. This was the man she was terrified of losing. This kind, steady, impossibly good man who made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. She got in line. When Edward looked up and saw her, his expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and something warmer that made her chest ache. "Amber?" He glanced around, clearly expecting to see her usual travel crew. "I didn't know you were flying today." "Last-minute trip," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded, slipping into professional mode. "Boarding pass?" She handed it to him, their fingers brushing in that familiar way that sent electricity up her arm. Edward scanned it, checked his screen, and started to hand it back. "Wait," Amber said. "Turn it over." He looked at her questioningly, then flipped the pass over. For a moment he just stared, then his breath caught. There, beneath the original question she'd written weeks ago, "Will you call me?" she'd added new words in the same hurried handwriting. "Will you take a chance on me?" Edward's hand trembled slightly. He looked up at her, and she saw everything she felt reflected back: fear, hope, longing, terror. "Amber, I know we're scared," she said quietly, aware they weren't alone, but not caring anymore. "I know this doesn't make sense on paper. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this could go wrong, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I can't keep waiting for you to make the first move when I'm the one who started this whole thing by writing my number on a boarding pass and hoping you'd call." "I did call," he said softly. "Eventually," she smiled. "After keeping me in suspense for days. I was terrified. I'm terrified now." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm terrified that you're going to tell me this is a bad idea, that I'm too complicated, that my world is too messy, that you don't want—" "Stop," Edward said. He glanced at his supervisor across the checkpoint, then back at Amber. "Give me a second." He walked over to his supervisor, said something she couldn't hear, and then came back around the security barrier to stand in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "I need to show you something," he said. He pulled out his wallet, the same worn leather wallet he'd carried the day they met, and opened it. There, tucked carefully behind his ID, was her original boarding pass. The one she'd handed him weeks ago, with shaking hands, and a question she'd barely been able to write. But there was writing on it she hadn't put there. Edward pulled it out and turned it over, showing her the back. Beneath her question, "Will you call me?" he'd written in neat, careful script. "Yes, I already did." Amber's eyes filled with tears. "I wrote that the night you gave it to me," Edward said quietly. "I kept looking at your number, trying to work up the courage to call, and I thought, what if she's asking the wrong question? What if the question isn't whether I'll call, but whether I'll take the risk?" "And you answered it," Amber whispered. "I answered it." He looked at the pass in his hand, then at her. "I kept this because every time I looked at it, I remembered what it felt like to be seen by someone. Really seen. Not for what I do or what I don't have or whether I'm enough, just seen." "You are enough," Amber said. "Edward, you're—" "Let me finish." He smiled, soft and vulnerable. "You asked if I'd take a chance on you. But Amber, I took that chance the moment I kept this pass instead of throwing it away. I took that chance every time I texted you. Every time I sat in my truck for an extra 5 minutes just to talk to you. Every time I told myself I was being stupid for falling for someone so completely out of my league." "You're not?" "I am," he interrupted gently, "in all the ways that matter to the rest of the world. But here's what I figured out. I don't care about the rest of the world. I care about you. And if you're brave enough to hand me your number with a question you can barely breathe through, then I'm brave enough to answer it." He took her hand, right there in the middle of the airport security checkpoint, with his co-workers watching and passengers staring and the world carrying on around them. "Yes," he said clearly. "I'll take a chance on you. I already did. I'd do it again. I'll keep doing it for as long as you'll let me." Amber couldn't speak. The tears had spilled over, and she didn't care who saw. She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the steadiness of his grip, the way he held on like he'd been waiting weeks to do exactly this. "I'm falling for you," she whispered. "I'm terrified and I'm falling for you, and I don't know how to do this without messing it up." "Then we'll mess it up together," Edward said. "And we'll figure it out, because I'm falling for you too." Behind them, someone cleared their throat. Edward's supervisor stood there with her arms crossed and an expression that was trying very hard to be stern but failing. "Wallace, you're holding up the line." "Yes, ma'am," Edward said, not letting go of Amber's hand. "I know." "Well, you planning to check her through or what?" Edward looked at Amber, a smile breaking across his face, the first truly unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "Actually, I don't think she's flying anywhere today." "No," Amber agreed, smiling through her tears. "I don't think I am." They walked out of the airport together, hand in hand, 2 boarding passes in Edward's wallet, a question and an answer that had changed everything. For the first time in weeks, neither of them felt afraid. They felt chosen. Edward's supervisor had given him 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Wallace," she'd said, trying to maintain some semblance of authority while clearly charmed by what she'd just witnessed. "Then you get back to work, and your lady friend here either flies somewhere or leaves the secure area. We still have regulations." "Yes, ma'am," Edward had said. 20 minutes. But he didn't let go of Amber's hand as they walked away from the checkpoint, past curious stares and whispered conversations, toward the quiet hallway that led to the staff areas. The same hallway where, weeks ago, Amber had collapsed into a chair after handing him her number, terrified and exhilarated and completely unsure of what she'd just done. Now she knew. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming softly overhead, the distant sound of announcements and rolling luggage muffled by the walls. Edward finally stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands still wrapped around hers. "Hi," he said softly. Amber laughed, the sound shaky and relieved. "Hi." "So," he squeezed her hand gently, "we're doing this?" "We're doing this," she confirmed. "Whatever this is." "I think this is the part where I ask you on an actual date," Edward said. "Not coffee where we pretend we're just friends. Not a disaster at a restaurant neither of us belonged in. A real date." "What did you have in mind?" He considered for a moment. "There's a food truck parked near the river. Best tacos in the city, according to the guys at work. Picnic tables, string lights, usually some guy playing guitar. Very romantic." He paused. "And absolutely zero chance of paparazzi or people judging my shirt." Amber smiled. "That sounds perfect." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. "Edward, I don't need fancy restaurants. I don't need you to fit into my world. I just need this. You. Us. His free hand came up to her face, fingers gentle as they tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, it made her chest ache. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what we were, he said quietly. Trying to convince myself not to hope for too much. Trying to protect myself in case this was just, I don't know, a phase, a rebound. Something that would fade once you realized I'm just a guy who works airport security and volunteers at a community center. Just? Amber shook her head. Edward, you're the kindest person I've ever met. You see people, really see them. You helped an old man with his luggage and calmed a crying baby and told me to take my time when everyone else in my life treats me like an appointment on a calendar. Her voice caught. You made me feel human again. You are human, he said. You always were. The money doesn't change that. But it does change how people see me, how they treat me. She looked up at him. This man who'd somehow become essential in just a few weeks. Except you. You never treated me like I was fragile or untouchable or something to be managed. You just treated me like Amber. That's all you've ever been to me, Edward said. Just Amber. Who writes questions on boarding passes with handwriting that shakes? Who shows up at community centers in jeans and helps serve food without expecting credit? Who laughs at bad jokes and texts me about dogs and sunglasses and makes me feel like maybe I'm not as ordinary as I thought? You're not ordinary, Amber whispered. You're extraordinary. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. They stood there in the quiet hallway, the airport carrying on beyond the walls, but in this moment it was just them. I haven't done this in a long time, Edward said softly. The last time I let myself feel something this big, it ended with me alone in an apartment, wondering what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, Amber said. She just couldn't see what I see. And what's that? Someone worth taking a chance on. Edward's breath hitched. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, fingers tangling gently in her hair. Amber's heart was racing, but not from fear this time. From anticipation, from the knowledge that whatever happened next would change everything. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, to change her mind, to remember all the reasons this was complicated. But Amber didn't pull away. She rose up on her toes and met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like she expected. It wasn't desperate or passionate or rushed. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded something or claimed ownership. It was soft, tentative. A question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm against hers, gentle in a way that made her want to cry. One hand cupped her face while the other stayed at the back of her neck, holding her like she was something precious. Something that mattered. Amber's hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms, steady and strong and real. She kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in for weeks. All the fear and hope and desperate longing she'd been too afraid to voice. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them went far. Edward rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard, eyes closed. Wow, he whispered. Yeah, Amber agreed, a smile breaking across her face. Wow. They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, hands still holding on. The world narrowed down to just this hallway, and this moment and each other. I'm still scared, Amber admitted quietly. Me too. What if we mess this up? Then we'll fix it. Edward pulled back just enough to look at her. Amber, I can't promise this will be easy. Your world and mine, they're different. There will be more restaurants, more judgmental looks, more people who don't understand what we're doing together. I don't care about them. I know, but I need you to understand, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to feel out of place sometimes. I'm going to worry that I'm not enough, or that I'm holding you back. He took a breath. But I'm not running. Not this time. Not from this. And I'm not going to try to fix everything with money, Amber said, or control every situation, or hide you away because I'm afraid of what people will think. She squeezed his hand. I'm going to stand beside you and let the world think whatever it wants. Because the only opinion that matters is yours. And mine is that you're the bravest person I know, Edward said. You wrote your number on a boarding pass and handed it to a stranger. You showed up at a community center when you could have just sent a check. You drove yourself to an airport and asked me to take a chance on you when you could have just walked away after that disaster of a dinner. It wasn't a complete disaster, Amber said, trying for levity. It was pretty bad. Okay, it was terrible. She laughed. But I'd do it again. I'd do all of it again if it meant ending up here. Edward kissed her forehead, soft and lingering. Here in a hallway behind airport security? Here with you? His supervisor's voice echoed down the hallway. Wallace! 5 minutes. Edward groaned. I have to get back to work. I know. Can I see you tonight? After my shift? Food trucks by the river? Amber asked. Food trucks by the river, he confirmed. It's a date. An actual, official. This is what we are. Date. I'll be there. They walked back toward the checkpoint together, hands still intertwined, neither quite ready to let go. When they reached the security area, Edward's co-workers were trying and failing not to stare. I'll text you the address, Edward said. I'll be waiting. Amber squeezed his hand one last time, then started to turn away. Amber? She looked back. Thank you, he said, for writing that question, for being brave enough to ask. Thank you for answering it, she replied, for keeping the pass, for taking the chance. She walked away with a smile on her face that she couldn't have hidden if she tried. Behind her, she heard one of Edward's co-workers whistle low. Wallace, you are in so much trouble. I know, Edward said, but he was grinning. Best trouble I've ever been in. That evening, Amber sat at a weathered picnic table by the river, eating tacos that were somehow better than any Michelin-starred meal she'd ever had. Edward sat across from her, telling a story about his nephew that made her laugh so hard she nearly choked. String lights glowed overhead. A guitarist played something soft and acoustic nearby. The river flowed past, reflecting city lights and stars in equal measure. You good? Edward asked, watching her with those steady, kind eyes. Yeah, Amber said. And for the first time in 2 years, she meant it completely. I'm really good. He reached across the table and took her hand, and Amber realized something profound. She'd spent 2 years looking for ways to fill the emptiness. Charity galas and board meetings and business deals that meant nothing. She'd tried to build walls high enough that grief couldn't reach her, thick enough that loneliness couldn't penetrate. But walls that kept pain out also kept love out. Edward hadn't saved her. She hadn't saved him. They just found each other, two people carrying their own wounds, their own fears, their own reasons to keep the world at arm's length. And somehow, impossibly, they decided to be brave together. Months later, people would still ask Amber what she saw in Edward Wallace. Airport security officer, volunteer, good man with a modest life and a 10-year-old truck. And she'd smile and think about boarding passes in quiet hallways, and the way he'd looked at her that first day, not at her money or her grief or her carefully constructed armor. Just at her. He sees me, she'd say simply, and that would be enough. Because wealth could buy comfort, but it couldn't buy worth. Power could control outcomes, but it couldn't control hearts. And sometimes, the person you need isn't the one who saves you. It's the one who helps you remember you were never broken in the first place. Just lost. Just waiting to be found. We didn't save each other. We found each other. And that made all the difference.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.